Welcome, everybody. I'm absolutely delighted to see you all this evening. Thank you so much for coming to our panel discussion, Strengthening Grassroots Women-Led African Leadership to Address Child Marriage Across the Continent. My name is Aisha Hutchinson. I'm a senior lecturer here at King's, at the School of Education, Communication and Society. This panel discussion is part of a 3-day workshop that we're hosting here at King's, following work together by King's, Rozaria Memorial Trust and the Women's Refugee Commission over the past couple of years. And during that time, we engaged with collaboratively in many different ways, unfortunately online because it was during COVID, with 80 actors from grassroots, women-led feminist organisations and movements across East Africa to develop a consensus as much as you can. And actually there was a huge amount of consensus around some really important themes and issues in addressing child marriage across East Africa. So the research has directly informed the development of a feminist vision for ending child marriage across East Africa. We call it a roadmap here, but magically it's come out. I also had a paper copy. And on your seats, there is a Scan Me, which is amazing, that can take you directly to the roadmap. Currently, critically, our roadmap prioritizes the experiences, the work, the voices, the capacity of grassroots, feminist or women-led place-based organisations and actors. And so at our workshop this week, we're thinking about how we might go around, how we're going to implement the roadmap, and also thinking about the continued evidence base that we need to build for long-term transformative change, led by, ideally, girls and women themselves as much as possible. This panel discussion aims to really shed light on why strengthening grassroots women-led leadership is so critical, particularly for addressing child marriage. But of course, child marriage is located within much broader strand of girls' empowerment and also gender-based violence. And also to talk about the ways that we can be part of this strengthening and partner with people to support this strengthening. So I'm going to hand over to Julianne from the Women's Refugee Commission. She's Senior Advisor on Adolescent Health and Protection, who's going to be chairing and who will introduce you to the panellists and will explain what's happening. And there should be an opportunity for questions later, but thank you for coming. And I'm going to hand over now to Julianne.
Thank you. Are these working? Can Lucy hear me? And others online? And everyone in the room? Okay, great. Hi, everyone, and welcome. And thank you, Aisha. So my name is Julianne Deitch, and I'm very lucky to chair this wonderful panel. It's quite a privilege. And my role right now is just to learn from all of you, to be curious, to ask the right questions, and guide our conversation toward understanding more what we mean by grassroots feminist or women-led African leadership, and as Aisha mentioned, how we can really all support this endeavor to end child marriage. My other important role is to keep time, so we don't have enough time, I'm sure, so I will probably at some point, unfortunately, have to interrupt you, and I apologize in advance. We have about 1 hour, and we want to make sure to have time for questions from the audience, as well as the closing remarks. So I will first be introducing our panelists, and because we're short on time, these are very condensed introductions that do not capture their breadth and depth of experience. But first we have Dr. Nyaradzayi Gumbonzvanda. Dr. Nyaradzayi is a trained human rights lawyer from Zimbabwe. She's been working for over 30 years on issues related to women and children's rights, both in her home country and globally. Dr. Nyaradzayi is the founder and chief executive of Rozaria Memorial Trust, a Zimbabwean organization that supports innovative approaches to health and education, largely in resource-poor communities of Zimbabwe. From 2014 to 2022, Dr. Nyaradzayi served as the African Union Goodwill Ambassador on ending child marriage. In this role, she led groundbreaking work on engaging and transforming traditional institutions for the protection of rights of children in her efforts to end child marriage. Next, we have Dr. Naver Chayelela. He joins us from Zambia as the General Secretary of the Pan-African Alliance on Ending Child Marriage. Naver is also the Executive Director of the Mudzuru Foundation, a community-based organization which works with traditional leaders and rural communities to end child marriage in Zambia. Naver holds a bachelor's degree in economics and demography, and he possesses over 15 years of experience working in project management as well as conducting quantitative and qualitative research. To my right, we have Mundia Situmbeko. Mundia is the Africa Engagement Officer with Girls Not Brides. She specializes in gender issues and has worked at the grassroots, national, and international levels to address harmful practices against women and girls. Mundia has conducted research and been part of the development of gender indices with the UN to support national policies to achieve gender equity. And in her current work at Girls Not Brides, she tackles child marriage through education, cross-sectoral partnerships, and meaningful youth engagement, as well as strengthening national legal frameworks. And last but not at all least, we have Catherine Vitaliano. She is the African Leadership Center Fellow with King's College London, where she is also pursuing a Master of Science degree in Global Leadership and Peace Building. Catherine is from South Sudan and is a trained lawyer. She's used her expertise to empower young women to participate in shaping the national agenda of South Sudan. She's also the co-founder of the Citizen Task Force on COVID-19, a platform that helped to mitigate adverse effects of the pandemic in South Sudan. Catherine is passionate about issues of governance and intergenerational dialogue, and her research interests lie in the impact of the crisis in South Sudan on refugees and displaced persons, particularly women and children. So let's give a hand to our incredible panelists. So I'm going to start by restating the title of our event, which is Strengthening Grassroots Women-Led African Leadership to Address Child Marriage. It's quite a mouthful. And Nyaradzayi, I want to start by asking you what this term means to you. What do you understand grassroots women-led African leadership to mean?
Thank you so much for that question. I'm tempted to invite us all to our village. Tuendembele wa mama o, tuendembele wa mama o, tuendembele. Fire, fire wa mama o. No woman, no cry. No woman, no cry. Community-led is not about the mind, it's about the totality of who we are. And I start by refusing and rejecting that when we are community-rooted, we are community-centered, we are leading our lives from our communities. We are not grass, and neither are we roots. We are not defined by a notion which is there to think we are a field where people can come to plow, plant, harvest, or be abandoned. But we are the totality of humanity. And I believe that community-rooted and community-led initiatives and organizations and leadership is so much embedded in the notion of being a global, which is local. There is no global without a local. And there's no local without a global, because we are interconnected by knowledge. We are interconnected by services. We are interconnected by the reality of today's lives in so many ways. So for me, the community-rooted and women-led is a feminist concept that starts by defining, by owning, by respecting, by valuing, by recognizing that each one of us lives in a community. Each one of us comes from a community. However, we define that community, whether we are talking about that community as being here in London, being in Glasgow, being in my village in Murewa, we all have an equality of identity of being. Therefore, what is community is actually where every woman is found, where every family is found. And secondly, community-led feminist approaches today is part of the deeper, bigger conversations which many of us have been fighting since before we were born. It's a decolonization agenda. It's a conversation that starts by saying we are inherently equal. It takes us back to the fundamentals of human rights, to that which is in the Charter of the United Nations, and therefore claiming the wisdom, the knowledge, the capabilities, the opportunities, and demanding of us in our work on ending child marriage today to redefine norms and terms. So the starting point for me is that notion of community-led is about renaming in order to renorming. Even the word child marriage is a misnomer. We are rejecting that word in our communities because a child cannot marry. We are normalizing, sanitizing, legalizing, legitimizing a criminal act, an acceptable act. So for me, community-led is about redefining the reality of our work in a way that brings back the dignity of women's knowledge, experience, and us defining the world that we want. And I'm very excited that together with King's College, with the Women's Refugee Commission, we've been working on this feminist approach and saying, how do we start to deepen that conversation and link with some of the work that is happening, that Rozaria Memorial Trust. Actually, my mother did not choose my father, by the way. She didn't. She was married to him and had this 14th pregnancy, and I'm her 14th pregnancy. We started Rozaria Memorial Trust. So what I'm also saying is women-led leadership is also about innovating from the womb of the pain of women's lives or the excitement of women's lives in the communities we come from to co-create the world that we need, but in a collaborative way. And I think that collaborative way is what we see today. For Rozaria Memorial Trust, 100 kilometers out of the capital city, collaborating with Women's Refugee Commission and international NGO with this King's College. And I'm like, okay, this is community-led, which is being valued and validated, but where we are coming as equals. And for me, that is what is very powerful and meaningful about being community-led in a relationship which is not matronizing or patronizing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I don't know how we'll follow on from those inspiring words. But Mundia, in your work with Girls Not Brides, how does such a network, such a vast global network, also draw from these principles that Nyaradzayi has described as being community-rooted and community-led in your work on ending child marriage?
Sure, thank you, Julianne. Nyaradzayi has pretty much said everything, so we can all go home now.
Oh, yeah.
So Girls Not Brides, for those who don't know, is the global partnership, civil society partnership to end child marriage. Girls Not Brides is very much member-led. We have members across the whole world that have one goal, is to come together to work to end child marriage. And the reason why we can all come and connect to end child marriage is because child marriage is, the root cause of child marriage is gender inequality. So at Girls Not Brides, of course, we recognize the different levels that Nyaradzayi spoke about. Like there is no global without local, so we really try and connect the dots with initiatives both at the, well, not both, at the local level, at the national level, regional level, and international level, so that we have that triangulation of information on what are the best strategies, learning from each other so that we can finally end child marriage. So when you talk about community, what that implies is a coming together. And this is what Girls Not Brides does. One of its major roles is really playing that convening role of bringing the conversations together. Child marriage there has been a decline in certain regions. Yes, we can celebrate the progresses, but we also have to recognize that there are so many gaps that need to be filled and the efforts have to be accelerated. And I think a lot of evidence has shown that the biggest impact comes actually from that community level, because it's so deeply rooted in social norms, in the way that we think. So for us to even change the mindset, that has to be done with dialogue at the community level and, of course, bringing these conversations all the way up.
Thank you so much. And so both of you have made such a strong case for the importance of community-led or grassroots feminist leadership. I want to ask maybe a bit more concretely what this looks like in practice. So Catherine, I'd love to turn it to you and ask about your experience working with young women, really shaping at the policy level the national policy of South Sudan, national agenda. So from your perspective and drawing from this work, why is it so critical to invest in building this kind of leadership, especially for young women?
Thank you so much. And it's always difficult to talk after doctor, and yeah, so I think when I was just reflecting on the term leadership and even just feminist leadership, you know, more often that we put words out there without even unpacking it. Mm-hmm. And I would like to just take this opportunity to, you know, give my reflection on the term leadership and also the feminist leadership. So, of course, feminist leadership means inclusivity, but as a fellow at ALC, usually we have an analytical framework to look at leadership. And what is so fascinating about the leadership as a process-based is not just looking at the top level, what my sister has mentioned, but rather we are looking at leadership as a phenomenon. Where is leadership happening? If we are looking at the grassroots, we start by the context itself. What is the situation like? Because it's very difficult in the morning as we are unpacking the methodology, is we talk about power dynamic, the question of how do we bring solution to the community, but then do we really go to the community and ask them what is the solution that they need, and especially with the issue of child marriage. And that's why for me, I see leadership as a process-based approach help in this case of child marriage, because we have to look at the situation itself, but also the exchange of influence within the community. And I think that's what Doctor was saying, that who is grassroots? You know, we need to ask ourselves, are we really, the community, are they really grassroots? Or actually they are the basis of change? That they have the power to change all this notion that we are talking in this room. And just linking it to my experience as a young woman in South Sudan, and my engagement at the policy at the national level, my story started more or less like a tag along, because there was a mentor that see potential in me and start to take my hand and come here, come to the table, see what is happening. And because of that sort of like the trust, or maybe the belief that another woman saw in me, I start to have the courage, like there's some voices that is missing in the table. Why am I not seeing a person as young as me in this table? Because those are our issue. I know exactly what it means to end, you know, let's say, for example, young women participation in, you know, political dialogue, you know, because I know the solution, but somehow I'm not in the table. So for me, it's very important that we have to be more context specific to get the solution that we want. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And a similar question to you, Naver, in your role on the Pan-African Alliance to End Child Marriage. How does this alliance that is at the policy level or regional level, how does it engage with community-driven leaders and foster this approach to leadership?
Thank you very much. And again, I want to say that after Doc has spoken, it's very difficult to, to follow up and express oneself. But nevertheless, first of all, let me say that the Pan-African Alliance is a group of dedicated individuals who include activists and advocates, and in terms of research, we've got social science researchers who work on issues of child marriage and child rights, and with a vision of an accountable Africa free of child marriage. The way I understand the issue of grassroots women-led leadership is that as a Pan-African Alliance on Ending Child Marriage, our vision itself is anchored on ensuring that young women are in the forefront of leading the agenda. Oftentimes, we take these young women who are often brought out of child marriages or retrieved from child marriages. We see them as victims and not as participants, and not as people that themselves have solutions to their problems. And so as a Pan-African Alliance on Ending Child Marriage, our vision being anchored on the leadership of young women, we want to ensure that even as we engage governments, even as we engage regional and continental organizations like the SADC PF or the AU, we allow the young women themselves to lead the charge, to lead the agenda, and to ensure that as a Pan-African Alliance on Ending Child Marriage, we equip these young women and ensure that they are not mere spectators, but they are actually participating in finding their own solutions within the process. And so this is my basic understanding of this topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So you're mentioning some practical ways in which we can actually invest in community-driven or grassroots feminist leadership. So maybe I can then continue to Nyaradzayi to maybe offer some real practical ways in which we can invest in this type of leadership and this approach to ending child marriage.
Thank you so much for. I want to draw on my 8 years of experience as the African Union Goodwill Ambassador on Ending Child Marriage and running Rozaria Memorial Trust, which is 100 kilometers out of Harare, the capital city of Zimbabwe, where I live and work from. I think first is that the work and efforts on ending child marriage is both a community-defined issue, but it is also agreed as a global concern that requires collective action. We see it in the SDGs. We saw it in the Agenda 2063. Even if we have baskets and baskets and baskets of policies, we have so many of them. The declarations, we even have a recent one, we are very happy and we're dancing when the Human Rights Council passed another resolution. We were happy. But resolutions are not transformative unless they are resourced and implemented in direct communities where girls live their lives, when they are translated into services, into behavior change, into social protection. So what I've learned is that unless we have strong feminist and community-led initiatives, and this is why I love the Girls Not Brides partnership at country level, the work that some of the partners here, the World Visions and others, unless we have that infrastructure in our communities, the policies might be made, but there is no measure of tools for accountability. And I really appreciate Naver for you placing an accountable Africa with no child marriage, because the deficit we have is accountability, and globally. And therefore, a feminist, women-led intervention is asking that question on how are these policies having meaning. At Rozaria Memorial Trust, we are even going further and saying, and within that work on ending child marriage, is that there are certain critical interventions, critical realities of life that at times are not even articulated in policy. For instance, Rozaria Memorial Trust, I run a shelter, an emergency shelter for survivors of gender-based violence. The majority are the girls that have experienced rape, they've experienced child marriage. What is rarely resourced in our work is the issues around trauma. We talk about a marriage as an event of cows being passed from one family to the other, but we are talking about rape, and rape in perpetuity for somebody's the rest of their life. It doesn't stop because they are now an adult. They remain, some and many remain in that relationship, forever being afraid of the night. That is what the girls tell me. It's Nyaradzayi, we are afraid of the night. What exactly do you mean? We are afraid of the night. They are afraid of having sex with somebody and raising children when you really don't feel like being touched. But society and all of us, not that we are, but there is a kind of a relaxed approach to the issue. It's like dealing with it as a norm, when actually it's a crisis of violation of millions and millions and millions of girls and women every day. So what I've learned is when we do community-led and we work with the girls, with the women who experienced this abuse, we have to be comfortable with having outrage. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to say this rape is not just a statistic, it's somebody's life. So I feel that the community-led and rootedness allows us to translate the realities of that pain, that trauma, into methodologies and approaches that can trigger accelerated interventions, because it's not about normal routine interventions. It's about accelerated interventions to say, this is unacceptable, this demands us to do more intense work, and I'm really looking forward to the study that we are doing with Dr. Rochelle at UCL around mental health in child marriage, and how we actually need a solid global movement to say, this is unacceptable. So that can come, we can only do that if we connect the dots of public policy, the dots of practice and services, the dots of knowledge in the academic space, where we would have as many universities, as many research institutions, as many partners saying, look, what we are seeing is the world is on fire, the women are burning, the girls are hurting. And I just want to connect with the experience in South Sudan and relate with how, on my mandate on ending child marriage, we went with Farai to WOW, to a displaced camp. Hundreds of girls and women still in this IDP camp. How many years after independence? After political independence, which does not mean freedom for our people. We need peace. We need to prevent disasters, natural disasters, climate-induced, things which are preventable, man-made. And the majority of people causing it are actual men. Sorry, Chayelela. It's very few women really fighting for power. It's mostly men fighting for power. And then our girls getting raped. So what I learned as the AU Goodwill Ambassador is we cannot be diplomatic about dying and about being raped and about losing education, losing health, wherever they talk about a maternal mortality, a very nice word, maternal mortality of a 14 to 24 age group. We are talking of burying, literally burying. So what I learned is that we have to go beyond treating the issues on ending child marriage from just a development perspective, but to understand the complexities and the urgency in crisis, in humanitarian crisis, in conflict situations, and demand an accountability. So yes, we need services, but women, community-led is also saying, you know what, if we can rally the world around COVID, like we did in the last 3 years, the whole world stopped everything. We even stopped going outside of our houses. We're quarantined and everything. Why can't the world stop everything? And we do behavior change. And we provide the schools. We provide the education. We buy less helicopters. We protect our girls. Why is the lives of women and girls not given the same currency? So I am writing my 8 years of experience as the African Union Goodwill Ambassador on Ending Child Marriage. I'm documenting, and I welcome the opportunity in the next couple of years to continue to reflect. But my opening sentence would be, we are all guilty because we are taking it as just a normal agenda when girls are dying, are raped and abused, and their life is lost. Some may recover their lives, but others may not be able to live a full life again. I'm not sure that my mother managed to. Of course, she died when she was 80 years, and we set up Rozaria Memorial Trust. We are trying to live her life through the trust, to say she could have community-led interventions allows us to do healing. And so for us, the work at Rozaria Memorial Trust is the healing piece, not just for this woman, but for the millions of other women, to say, we need healing and closure in ways that respect, but in ways that says, it should not happen to another girl tomorrow in my village, nor in my family. We are all responsible. That's what community-led means. Each one of us is responsible. Whatever we do, we are all champions on ending child marriage.
Thank you so much. Very profound, and a lot for us to think about and sit with and really reflect on. And on this idea of accountability, and that we are all accountable, and we should be all accountable, and that we are all guilty, as you say. I want to then open it to others on the panel to reflect on how feminist leaders can hold others accountable, what are some actionable items, and who should be held accountable. So what actors in this space of ending child marriage should be held accountable the most, perhaps, and how we can do that. And Mundia, maybe I'll start with you to reflect on that.
Sure. That's quite a lot to unpack. But I think in light of what we're speaking about today, when we talk about community interventions, as I said earlier, communities is about coming together of lots of individuals. And we always say, the way society treats women, but we say society as if it's something out there, but it's actually us, the individuals. So I guess to also throw the question back at everyone on the panel, we have to hold each other accountable, but we also have to hold those that are in decision-making positions accountable. And it has to be a two-way thing. Even if you're separated from the decision-making tables, how are you able to access those? How do we ensure that the girls themselves who are affected by child marriage in the first instance are able to access those platforms, those tables that previously maybe they might not have access to? And also, I think to touch on one of the things that Nyaradzayi said as well, child marriage is not the problem. It's not a problem for girls. It's all of our problem. Because once a girl's life is destroyed, everything around her is going to be affected, whether it's her family, the people that she interacts with on a daily basis. And there's so much evidence out there to prove this. So we have got to have that collective action attitude when it comes to resolving child marriage, making sure that strategies are developed in a holistic manner. So, for example, Nyaradzayi talked about mental health. How do we support girls that have been affected by child marriage? How do we support those that have been removed from child marriages? How do we support them to live a more fulfilled life, access education, access employment, be independent, so that no one can come and make decisions for them? One of Girls Not Brides' strategy is movement building. And movement building I love also because we talk about movement building like it's this big movement. Yes, it can be big, but movement building can just start with just 2 people, 3 people in a room. You make a decision, you agree on certain things, you go out there and start talking to other people to join in the movement. So how do we do this with several stakeholders at different levels so that as we address child marriage, we keep in mind that holistic approach to resolve the issue?
Thank you. And Catherine, maybe, yes, the same or similar question to you, and especially as you described leadership as a process and something that is ever evolving. I guess what actors can support that process, and especially as it relates to ending child marriage?
Thank you so much. I think I was a bit fired up when the question is spoke, and then 2 main actors came in my mind. Number 1 is the policymakers, and then number 2 is the humanitarian or the donors community. The reason why I say the policymakers and being in just policy spaces, at times, like for example, let me talk my context, South Sudan. We recently ratified the Maputo Protocol, and it's very beautiful, written and everything. And it was because of a lot of pressure from women-led organizations, and then the state decided, to ratify it to just look very good at the global stage. But then on the other side of it, because the ratification is political, it doesn't mean anything in terms of implementation. And the second bit, when I say the humanitarian actors, is because of ownership and how programs are designed. And usually the intervention in my context is more or less, it's a project-based. And what Doctor has mentioned, that these issues, child marriage, for example, in South Sudan, is a generational thing. It happened before and before and before. And then today, a donor will come and then do a short-term intervention as a project, but what does it mean to the community, And it becomes sort of like a project whereby there's no trust, there's a trust deficit between the donor community and then also, and then the community at the national level. And at times, the question of how do we now get to the end of all these issues is because it's more or less the community become like, they just give you an answer because they know the donors kind of mindset. It's like, oh, you come to implement this particular project, I know what you want. But then the issues are not well resolved and all that. So for me, it has to be like what my sister said, it has to be an holistic approach. It has to be, we need to co-create intervention, not necessarily kind of develop a strategy that at a national level and imposing it at the community level. There's a need for co-creating and just changing the narrative, not necessarily doing a workshop, not necessarily, but literally just listening to the community. What is that solution they need, you know? So rather than just deciding at the national level, meanwhile, not necessarily put into context I don't want to say grassroots, but yes, I think for me, that will be the two actors that need to change their approach. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm mindful of time, and I do want to leave time for some questions and some very important closing remarks that I think will leave us very inspired. So I will open it to the audience. If anyone has any questions, we probably have time for a few. And keep in mind that we do have time after the panel to meet and mingle and ask questions individually to the panelists. So does anyone in the audience have a question? And you can just very briefly introduce yourself before your question if you like. So go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you so much for your wealth of knowledge that you shared with us this evening. I'm a child marriage survivor myself, and I recently led the campaign that changed the legislation here in England and Wales. And Doctor, my question is for you, specifically around the way we talk about child marriage. I spend a lot of time thinking about how to talk about child marriage with the public, in media, and with decision makers. And I often felt like if I'm too harsh with the language that I use, I will scare people off and they will be disengaged. And I found your comments very interesting that when we speak about child marriage, it's somewhat normalized and we're talking about it as though it's just something happening when actually, as you rightfully said, girls are literally dying, they are losing their livelihoods. And so my question is, do you think we need to strengthen the language that we are using? Do we need to be more hard-hitting with when we talk about child marriage? Thank you so much.
And maybe we'll just take one more question, if there is any, and then we can answer.
Thank you very much. I think it's been really inspiring. My name is Nana Otuyote, and I work with Forward, a UK-based nonprofit. Talking about feminism, it's really interesting. This weekend, we actually did a leadership training. And one of the young women who came said her mom didn't want her to come because of the notion of feminism. I'd like to really hear from you in terms of the derogatory notion of feminism. And we may need to have a different term, because that is also putting a lot of people off from coming on the agenda, both male and female. And for the young women, we're seeing a lot of them say, no, my community is very much against the term feminism. So I really would love to hear a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so for the first question, please.
To the first question and then to the question from Nana. Let me start by saying thank you. Thank you for daring to let your own experience be part of your voice. And secondly, for that voice not being just for yourself, but for others, for millions of others. On your question on should we step up the language, patriarchy is vicious. It's very vicious. The backlash, when we use strong language, and I started by talking about my own parents. It doesn't mean that I respect my father less. It simply means that my mother did not choose my father. But it doesn't mean that I love him less, I respect him less. I simply am saying what happened should not have happened. He may have had his own reasons. Maybe he didn't also have a choice. Maybe his society pushed him to then marry my mother. So I think what we, having been in the being part of civil society and being in the diplomatic space is at times we are too diplomatic that we lose the essence of what we are trying to say because we want to be accepted. We want to be accepted, so we use language which would make it easier to be accepted. Change does not happen by scaling up the status quo. Change happens by creating and facilitating an uncomfortable conversation on the critical conversation that needs to happen. So a critical conversation needs to happen that adult men are prying over a 12-year-old. We can't say it's because the father needs gender training. No, it's simply about adults being responsible for the well-being of children, even at that very basic level. So my response is, yes, of course, there is context specific. Saying the truth is not equal to being disrespectful. Saying the truth and saying what hurts is saying what needs to be said in order for us to have the solutions. So I was saying, let's not hide the issues, but let's remain respectful in that conversation. Because that is the basic critical, is to be respectful, but being respectful does not mean that we don't have to say what needs to be said. I think for instance, in the context of Africa, and I can say it, and I have been saying it, including whether it's a meeting with heads of states or whoever is, child marriage is not a micro only. It's not only a micro household issue. It's a macro economic governance issue. It's about our governments making choices on where they put their resources. But it's also about changing the narratives. My Africa is not poor. The African women are poor, and some men. But Africa is very rich. From Cape to Cairo, oil, diamonds, everything. We are flowing with resources, but we have a narrative globally which says child marriage is a result of poverty. It's an incomplete narrative. We need the uncomfortable discussion to complete that narrative. Why do I live next to a gold mine? I literally live next to a gold mine, and my district is the highest prevalence of gender-based violence, of HIV, of child marriage. Why? So let's talk about governance. Let's talk about extractives. Let's talk about private sector investment policies. Let's talk about the macro governance issues, in addition to talking about the attitude of my traditional leader and my priest. But let's not just stop at the attitude of the traditional leaders, because the traditional leaders may wake up tomorrow and they are angels. But as long as we don't have a school, the girls will have no school to go to. The government has to put money. So I feel, let's say what needs to be said. Let's have the conversation that needs to be had. My sister Nana, we had African feminists before the word was even found and was even coined. Maybe we need to find an African word that speaks to it. And this is why we look at Queen Zingers, we look at Sheba, we look at the Wangu Wamakeris, who were powerful women in the Kikuyu traditions. We look at so many powerful African women, pre- and post-colonialism, who were asking the same questions, who were fighting the same fights. So what we are also saying is that African feminism is not just about naming and shifting what is negative about patriarchy and about our culture, but it's also about lifting the positive feminist notions that exist within our society. At Rozaria Memorial Trust, We've started to reclaim the Nanga, the safe space for girls that has existed over centuries. Binti ya wanawake, Egumeni. These spaces have existed. They have resisted modern religions. They've resisted the advent of colonialism. They exist as safe spaces where girls are. What might need to be changed is the content of the training and the information in those spaces. But it doesn't mean that we didn't have African feminism. So within the African feminist movement, which I'm part of, is we're saying, look, let's contextualize the conversation on culture. And African feminism is also on a renaissance. We are saying, look good, beautiful in African dress, and we can be very sexy and very comfortable, very daring, very professional, because you're raising a conversation which we are having in the communities with some of our leaders who would say the work we do on child marriage with girls on SRH is Western. And you're saying there's nothing Western about being a woman. Being a woman is being fullness of humanity. It's not being defined by any culture. Every society should respect and has its ways of respecting. So we should not let culture be used by pedophiles and criminals to hide behind culture in order to rationalize and justify child marriage. Our culture is a culture that revered womanhood. And therefore, whatever happened in between, for then others to say you can use culture to justify, is the things which we need to reclaim. So I'm very excited about us having an African feminist approach that says culture is transformative. We remove the negative ones, but also let's reclaim the power of dance, of song, as part of the healing, as part of the feminist discourse, because that is also what we bring into the space, is the African feminism, which is more expressive than just words. And the African drum speaks to African feminism, and we can dance the whole night and talk about very serious issues, including marriage. That's where dating happened.
Thank you. And I would love to maybe turn to the audience just for one more question, and then give time for closing remarks. And I see a question from
Hi, I'm very inspired. Thank you so much, all of you, for great conversations. My name is Faith. I'm the CEO for Girls Not Brides. Really proud to have Mundia represent us today. Dr. Nyaradzayi, we just talked briefly here. The things I worry about are some of the narratives we are driving, for example, even through research, the data. One of the worrying statistics I have seen recently is that it will take us 300 years to end child marriage. I would like to hear what is your perspective on that, because I worry that we are also not really driving the narrative of where success is happening, because success is happening. We are seeing change. So are we cutting our own efforts? And I'm not against data, I'm not against research, but I'm also a very strong believer that success breeds success. And in such kind of hard core work, because it's hard, what we are doing is hard, we really need a little bit of inspiration. Otherwise, you've been in this for a long time, there are people coming behind you. Sometimes we just need to hear we are winning. What is your thought about that?
Please.
My name is Lakshmi Sundaram. I was Faith's predecessor. And I would say that two of the actors of some of the ways in which we are winning are the other two people who asked questions. So Nana and Paisley, and the incredible work that they've done to actually create change. And one of the things that was so exciting about some of the early days of Girls Not Brides was that this sense that even if things were really awful in one community and you could see backlash and things were hard and rolling back, you could still see that something was advancing somewhere else. And that gave people hope and strength, and it put a bit more fire in the belly, and it's like, all right, we're going to dig deep, and gave a sense of like, okay, we can actually move forward, because we're not seeing that path right now. It's really foggy, but our sisters in another continent, in another context, have been able to navigate an equally foggy path and are able to start moving. And I think that's one of the things that's incredibly inspirational. And Faith, is really tricky, that point about the 300 years, because on the one hand, you want that like really shocking number to kick people into action, but you don't want a number that is so depressing that people feel like, well, we're never going to be able to make any progress there, so let's just, go do something else instead.
Thank you. We are almost at time, so I'm going to leave it for our panelists to say one closing remark and then hand it to our two colleagues who will offer their closing thoughts as well. So let's keep it brief, maybe one point that you want to leave the audience with, and very short, just one key point. Catherine, please.
Thank you. I think I just want to say one thing is that the question of documentation, probably when you say that we are not seeing success, but then the question of documentation. And in the morning we had a session on storytelling and about language and how do we coin the success, because there's so much success that is happening back home, but then how do we now coin those, success, or write it and then put it out there so that people can see that, yes, there's progress that is happening. And I can say that for a fact that in some places there's a lot of success that is happening, but then we just need to document more. We need to tell the story more from not the mainstream way, but we need to now change the narrative on how we can put the story out there. And last but not least, I think I just want to say that the only approach forward is collective. That's one thing, that collective approach, but also at the same time reclaiming space. But then the last thing is co-creating and co-leadership. That's the way forward. I think that's my three key takeaways.
Thank you so much. And Naver, what would you like to leave the audience with today?
Yes, despite the depressing statistics, the 300 years really puts one off. But despite that, it's a fact that there is progress taking place in pockets around the world, and that should be encouragement enough for all of us to continue working hard. There's a lot of work to be done, and we have to continue working hard. And coming from the perspective of the Pan-African Alliance, I've got 3 words that I'll continue, speaking about, and this is the issue of, localization, ownership, and sustainability. Whether we look at resource mobilization, whether we look at research, whether we look at how best to engage our government, our policymakers, our legislators, we have to think of ensuring that, we look at the fact of, localizing our resources and ensuring that we own the processes, and that is what will give us a sustainability to continue moving forward, to continue working hard, to continue working extra hard so that we can overcome even this statistic of it going to take us 300 years to overcome child marriage. So that's my
Thank you.
My parting thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Nyaradzayi?
Thank you. Just like with HIV, we reduce life to a number. And that's wrong. Yes, we need data, we need statistics, but one life is one life so valuable in its own right that we need maybe to look at a new narrative of progress. 2014 there was the Girls Summit in London. And I came to BBC. Now I don't know whether it's this building or another building. And we actually have had a movement which Girls Not Brides has been part of. And initially, Girls Not Brides was just focusing on Africa, initially. And now we see the work is global. We never used to even talk about child marriage in the Western world. It was a developed country issue. And the moment we said, there's child marriage in the US and in the UK, it was like, really? So what we need is to continue to challenge the narratives, because the 300 years is a digging in to say, it's not enough to use the 300 years as a way of saying, let's accelerate. We have to tell the story of progress. We didn't have the Council of Traditional Leaders on ending child marriage. We didn't have a global movement on ending child marriage. We didn't have a global fund, and we didn't have the big funds which are there supporting this work. So maybe it's us who are on the front line who need to document and shout out the progress and say, actually, if we can do this in the last 10 years, we can do even much more in the next 6 years up to 2030. And we just scale up and say, let's scale up, and these are the extra pieces that needs to happen. But I think lastly, my last word, Julianne, is unless we dare to resource communities more directly and change the nature of the relationships and the partnerships, definitely we may stick to the 300 years, because we'll still be in the same mode of delivering social change. So we need some shifts around how we relate, how we resource, how we shift power, how we shift leadership, how we co-create solutions together. Actually, that is one piece which I'm very excited. Where is Aisha? Aisha, thank you so much. And Julianne, because us as an organization just in that village in Zimbabwe, to be part of a global change process, in connecting the academia with policy, in a solid, systematic way for years, and not just for an event. The research we are doing with UCL is those shifts which we need, which is not anecdotal relationship, but which is systematic, multi-year, because that's where community-led, because it means we are all holding each other from our own communities and creating a global community together. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Mundia, no pressure, but a few words that you want to leave the audience with.
Sure. Again, echoing that 300 years is depressing, but even just thinking back to the MDGs and moving forward to the SDGs, there wasn't a specific goal and target for child marriage. So I think that in itself shows that we can be progressive in the way that we want to address child marriage, and also that change can actually come about. And it's up to us to make that change. 300 years is a projection, but that projection can change based on the steps that we take at all the different levels. But just maybe 3 takeaways is harnessing the power that girls have, because they have it, but then how do we support girls to be able to really show that they are able to make choices for themselves, that they are able to come together and make sure that change happens. Because as mentioned earlier, girls, child marriage affects the girls themselves. So without them and without them participating in finding solutions and making sure that the solutions are contextualized, then we're going to keep seeing child marriage. Secondly, collective action. I think everyone here has been talking about collective action. We have to do it together. It's everyone's problem. So when it comes to from policy to dialogue to legal frameworks, all of those can happen individually in their corners, but it has to come together so that we actually see the change and this reduction in child marriage. And lastly, evidence is key, but I think more importantly, what are we learning from the evidence? I think that's because evidence in itself, we have statistics, we have numbers, but what are we actually going to do with those numbers? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm pleased now to introduce our two guests who will be delivering closing remarks, and we'll still have time for wine and mingling, but hopefully this will be short and inspirational. Our first guest who will be giving closing remarks is joining us online, and that's Lucy Mabikwa. Lucy is a development practitioner. And Lucy, I can't see the screen, so I hope she is there. She is a Women in Peace and Security Fellow at the African Leadership Center at King's College. She holds a degree in development studies, as well as a master's in public policy and development management. Lucy has been advocating for girls' empowerment since a very young age. She was a member of the Zimbabwe Junior Parliament in high school, where she contributed to the initiative's work towards representation of children in policy dialogue and implementation. And after Lucy speaks, we are so honored to hear from Loveness Mudzuru. Loveness is a Programs and Research Associate with Rozaria Memorial Trust. She is a social worker by training and holds a diploma in social work. She's been with RMT, Rozaria Memorial Trust, for over 8 years, and most recently she has incredibly led our joint research on child marriage in humanitarian settings in East Africa. Loveness is a fierce advocate for ending child marriage. Most notably, she won a case in the Constitutional Court of Zimbabwe in 2016 with a judgment that declared 18 years as the legal minimum age of marriage, which immediately deemed all forms of child marriage in Zimbabwe as unconstitutional. So, Lucy, over to you for your reflections on the panel discussion as a young woman African leader. Hopefully technology will.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
All right, thank you everyone for the conversation. As we're coming to the end of this discussion, I think we need to express gratitude to our panelists and indicate that there were insightful contributions and the dedication to this important cause has been shown. It's evident that there is collective action and efforts of passionate individuals and communities in trying to eradicate this important cause, and we need to hammer the cause and show that there is importance in partnerships. So we need to indicate again that we need grassroots level where people are committed to creating a brighter future for young girls. We need to continue raising awareness and advocating for policy changes and supporting local initiatives. The conversations show that there is a lot of dedication towards this work, and by collaboration and partnerships, we can make a long way to eradicating this empowerment of our young girls and building their own futures, to pursue education and escape this cycle of child marriages. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy.
Loveness, can I invite you?
Yes, please. So I will just ask everyone to give themselves a round of applause. You as well, the participants. You know why? The reason why we are clapping hands for ourselves and really acknowledging the men and the women and all our diversity in gender that we have all been acting and standing and fighting, and no matter what has been happening, I'm sure you have been doing your own portion to make the change for the girls to end child marriage in our different communities. So we have just been speaking about grassroots women-led organization, women-led leadership. And as one of the panelists mentioned, that it's actually not grassroots organizations. It's about the community, and the community is us. So that's why I've been asking you to clap hands for yourselves, and I'm really glad that at least I have a colleague in the house today who has actually stood up as a young person, a survivor. I am really happy that you are here today, and I am really glad that as survivors of child marriage, we have not only just stood up as people who are taken as tokenists, who only share stories of their experiences, but have actually started the leadership to end and make the change in our different communities. So what it really means to me as an individual is Loveness Mudzuru, to be a grassroots or community feminist leader. It just basically means that I have the good understanding of what community means, what a woman really means. So for me, a woman is not just an individual. She's more like this huge package of diversity and intersectionality that needs to be handled with a different, not just one package of intervention, but quite a huge holistic approach. But what I do wonder is, as a grassroots or community woman feminist leader, how do we move further to actually acting with a holistic approach when we are living in a society which is highly patriarchal, and when we want to do a holistic approach with policymakers, with traditional leaders, with whosoever that we want to hold accountable to, who is really, really so much embedded into patriarchy. That's where the conversation of resourcing, and we are thinking, yes, Africa is so rich, but the people that are holding the resources are the people that are actually perpetuating child marriage and gender inequality and all these traumatic things that are happening to us. Let me just say that in terms of language, child marriage, we should remember, I do not even know why we still call it child marriage. Well, it's just another form of slavery, a huge amount of raping that is happening each and every day, the kind of abuse that we do not know how to even give a good name for it. But it is something that people like me are experiencing each and every day. And then we realize that we have to give it a good language which is respectful. How do you give respect to something that is traumatic to someone each and every day? How do you speak with dignity about something that is really affecting me each and every day? So I'm hearing the conversation going to, why can't we stop the whole world like what we did during COVID-19? And I'm wondering, do people really consider child marriage as an issue to stop their lives for? I'm really glad that you are here, because it means that you have actually stopped your life for like 2-3 hours for this session, just to be here and just for us to hear this kind of conversation and have some good reflections of what needs to be done further in our lives. And I did mention that women need like a whole individual, not just an individual kind of approach, but a holistic, intersectional, collective kind of approach in terms of responding to whatever that is happening. So with the roadmap, I think Julianne mentioned that I was also part and parcel of the research that is the roadmap, the vision, the feminist vision to end child marriage roadmap. And with co-creation and we want to do a collective response to each and everything. The roadmap actually it's a matter of you just opening the roadmap and figuring out where you want to be seen and how you want to act. With the outcomes, it has got so many like different stakeholders, and you are also involved as a member, as just an individual, as a community member, as a civil society organization CEO, or whoever that you are. It means that you have like a role to play in ending child marriage, in making sure that girls have got a safe space and are protected. I'm really happy for the men that are here today, applauding Mr. Naver Chayelela and the traditional leaders that he works with, who have actually been there just to support to protect the girls in our different communities. I guess I had a saying somewhere that I wrote and I wanted to share it with everyone. I can't remember where, but anyway, what I really, really want to say today is, as an individual and hearing like, what can we do further to enable young women to be leaders? How do we move further the conversations? I think I would really want to learn how to be respectful when it comes to me being a leader, and that I am today. Of course, I consider myself a leader. I'm a champion, I'm an ambassador. I do, because yes, I have been there to actually bring back those conversations for everyone to understand what child marriage really means, what I really want, not just as an individual, but standing for the so many other girls that are unable to speak. Like what Dr. Nyaradzayi was just saying, we as survivors, sometimes we speak of our issues, and most of the time we try to be respectful because we have like a family that we have to go back to who would want to hear like this good picture that they want to picture for us, which is not really true. But I have been able to stand for those women that I have not been able to say or be able to speak about what is really happening to themselves. But moving further, whilst I am trying to be a leader, I need a lot of support. We need a lot of support. We need you to always hold our hands. We need more of the nanas and the Nyaradzayis. We need more of you in our lives each and every day. And we know you might not be able to hold our hands forever, but the young generations and everyone else who is in the room, you still need to remember that we will still need you forever, and we will still need you to help us whilst we are in front of those policymakers and they don't want us to say those blunt words and so forth. For you to come into that conversation and say, you know what, allow them. Because the trauma that they have experienced will not allow them to say those, is it respectful words that they would expect us to use. So thank you so much to the panelists for making this. Yeah, I feel like I've been empowered to be a better leader from moving forward. My conversations will move further with policymakers on investment and resourcing, ending child marriage, moving further. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So I'll invite us now to move over to the drinks and the snacks and have some time to ask additional questions.